And it is an honor and a pleasure to be here with you all and to be able to contribute and serve in this way. I want to take a moment and say to our founder and president, just thank you. Thank you for extending this invitation for me to come and just be a part of this memorable ceremony. Thank every one of you all for being in this space. I do want to clarify a few logistics. The bathrooms are right out here. When you come out to your left, next to the elevator is the women's, and directly across to your far right is the men's. There's an emergency exit stairway right next to the elevator if necessary. Just some logistical things. Please feel free that as this ceremony goes on, go back and forth, get more wine, get more hors d'oeuvres, come on back and join us. We're gonna have a lot of energy in this space, so you can stand up. You don't have to stay seated. This is a celebration. Let's get started with a powerful, powerful, exemplary video of what JLUSA is and why we're here. All the hard work going on here in New York City for the Closed Rikers campaign. You've seen all the hard work that JL's done nationwide, city to city. There are leaders, their leadership being amplified throughout the nation. We have leaders that are getting placed in positions of authority within their state governments, their local ACLUs, and this video is going to just really depict what this movement truly is all about. While we're getting our sound queued up, I want to just really give a brief snippet of my own experience with JLUSA and what it's doing in my community in Louisville, Kentucky, and throughout my entire state. So recently, our ACLU, who had a few policies that they were really pushing around restoration of voting rights. The state of Kentucky is one of 3 states that permanently takes away the voting rights, and I'll clarify as we go on, but let's go ahead with this video. Thank you.
Everyone who gets sentenced in this country gets sentenced to life. And they get sentenced to life because the stigma of a criminal record never goes away. And so 70 million Americans are stuck there as this new underclass of citizenship in America. And that is just not who we are as a country. That doesn't line up with our values. And I asked myself, what would Dr. King say is wrong about how we're approaching this issue? And I think he would have said that if you had an issue that affects 70 million Americans, if you got to the point where there's a policy that has devastated the lives of so many millions of people, then those are the very people who we should be investing in to get us out of this mess. now, in less than 2 years, we've trained 222 leaders in 26 states plus DC. And these are all organizers, activists, and advocates. We're not creating leaders. These people are already leaders. We're investing in them.
So many of us have been doing this work for so long on our own, in our own spaces. It was really encouraging to walk into a room and hear the things that they're doing in their areas is phenomenal.
We've had tangible successes like a commitment to move the kids off of Rikers from the mayor, stopping the construction of a new jail on Rikers. But the biggest success we've had so far has actually been intangible, in that when we started, true believers would agree and everybody else would be very skeptical and think it was a sort of idealistic thing that maybe many years in the future. And now the conversation has shifted in that whether it's elected officials or reporters or other stakeholders, it's not so much should it be done, but they ask us, like, well, what is your plan? How exactly would you get it done? And so we're coming back with increasingly more thorough and more specific ideas about how we get to the finish line.
We don't exclude people because they have a certain type of conviction. As an organization, if we're pushing the field to cut the correctional population in half by 2030, we're not saying except for these folks, except for these folks.
I would argue that if Americans understood that the system is stuck around punitiveness and punishment and has lost its appetite for redemption and transformation and opportunity and rehabilitation and second chances, that most Americans would say, not in my name. That's not a criminal justice system I want to exist in my name.
It's the power of video, the power of photos, and the power of JLUSA. I get the pleasure to invite up this speaker who is the epitome of leadership. He oozes confidence, commitment, and everything about the way this man walks, breathes, and lives, I want to have in my repertoire. He was the former Just Leadership USA manager of training. And recently, I want to take a moment, and if you all also will pat this gentleman on the back and congratulate him on becoming the Associate Vice President of Policy at the Fortune Society. I give you Khalil Cumberbatch, 2015 Leading with Conviction alumni. Thank you.
Testing. How y'all folks doing? Yeah. Let's give a round of applause for the graduates. Congratulations. Thank you all for gathering here today, and thank you to Just Leadership USA for inviting me and continuing to embrace me as family and continue to create opportunities for folks like myself to speak very briefly to the graduates and to our guests. So thank you, Glenn and Valerie and the Just Leadership USA team, Ronald, wherever you are running around, I know doing something, but thank you so much. So I don't have a lot of time, but I do want to share a couple of brief stories with you to highlight the point on why Just Leadership USA is so important, not only to everyone in this room, but important to the field of criminal justice reform. So when I first heard about Just Leadership USA, I was sitting in the office with Glenn at his prior job, and he told me that he was leaving that job to start an organization. And he said this organization, Khalil, is going to be for people just like you. And he said there's going to be a leadership component that's going to build out your leadership capacity to change this field dramatically. And this was before many people heard about Just Leadership USA. This is before many people heard about Half by 2030. This was before we all heard the backstory of how Just Leadership USA came to fruition. Before closed Rikers, here was a man who I admired, who was a mentor and a friend, that was telling me that the next iteration of his career was not going to be something that was beneficial to just him. It was going to be something that was beneficial to me and to us. And so that was inspiring to me, right? Here is someone who was formerly incarcerated, who didn't really know what the next iteration of my career was going to be. But this was someone who was telling me that he was going to push the field to invest into people like me. And so that was the first time I heard about Just Leadership USA. I subsequently obviously applied and then got into the program, right? And was part of the inaugural cohort. So we laugh and we joke and we say that we were the guinea pigs, right? So everything that this year's cohort has benefited from, we learned during our first year. But after completing the program and working for a year with David Mensah and the other Just Leadership USA staff, and getting a level of empowerment that I quite honestly have never had in my life, but definitely past my incarceration, I have never been able to achieve. After completing that program, Glenn again invested in my leadership. Right, we were in the back of a cab. Yes, Glenn, I'm going to say we were in the back of a cab.
It's not what it sounds like.
I had the honor of shadowing Glenn for a day, and it was in the back of a cab ride from one of his meetings that he again told me about his next vision for what Just Leadership was going to be. And he had reached a point in the organization where he could actually build out the capacity and hire more people. And instead of going to the field and looking for folks who on paper may have been more qualified than me, here he was again investing in my leadership. And he said, Khalil, I'm looking for someone who can manage the leadership training program, but I'm looking for someone who went through the leadership training program. And again, it was an investment in my leadership, but also, and in some respects, more importantly, my empowerment. Because all too often, folks are given the moniker of leader, and they're given the responsibility of leadership, but they've never been empowered enough to believe that their leadership is impactful. And more importantly, in this case, that it is meaningful and that it is necessary. And so 2 years later, obviously, I'm no longer at Just Leadership USA. But when I was approached with this new opportunity, I had a level of empowerment after engaging with David Mensah for almost 3 years, after engaging with Glenn for my entire reentry. I believed that I had what it took to do this job and to do it effectively, but more importantly, I knew for a fact that this was the role that I was needed in, and that organization needed me just as much as I needed them. And to be quite honest with you, I don't believe that I would have had that level of empowerment had I not went through the leadership training program, Leading with Conviction training program, that gave me that level of empowerment. It made me believe that indeed those closest to the problem are closest to the solution. And therefore this organization needed to hire me. So I wanted to thank Glenn publicly for that. I want to thank David Mensah for investing in me. And I want to thank the Just Leadership USA staff. Let's give them a round of applause. You know, the moniker and the motto of Just Leadership USA is that those closest to the problem are closest to the solution.
That's right.
And many of us say that, but in order for it to actually get more traction, all of us have to believe that. Because it is much more than a slogan. It's much more than a communications tool. It has to be something that we believe in. Because if we look at other social justice movements, it wasn't until the folks who had the most to lose, who were at the front of that movement, who were empowered enough, where spaces were created for them to be at the leadership, to be in the front, that movement dramatically changed. And so one day, mass incarceration, as we know it, it will be over.
That's right.
And what comes out of that, we don't know. That is largely on us, right? But one day, what we call mass incarceration, it will be over.
Right.
I believe that organizations like Just Leadership USA, when the story is told of how we beat that system, of how we changed it, of how we forced people to believe that something that they thought was impossible was actually possible, that Just Leadership USA will be part of that narrative. Because it is an organization who pushes a field to be inclusive of our voices. Half by 2030 is also not just a motto. It is something that is, it's a statement, it's a flag that we put in the ground to push the field to believe that something that they think is unachievable is actually very achievable, but that we have to be bold and audacious in order to achieve it. And that's the main reason why Just Leadership USA is so important. Because this thing that we're facing, this multi-headed system, it needs a new vision. It needs for people to think outside of the box. It needs for people to be bold and audacious in what they believe is possible. And at the same time, understand that the folks in this room, the folks who have the most to lose when they're talking about policies that impact us, that we must not only be at the table, but we should have a large ability to dictate what's going to be on that table, what the agenda is going to be, what the policies are going to be. And so Just Leadership USA is near and dear to my heart. You guys cannot get rid of me. I had to be here, not only for the 36 graduates in this room, but for the field, to show them that even after somebody moves on, it doesn't mean that they're no longer family. Right. That ideology of like, well, that person no longer works here, so we can't have them here, that is BS. That the only way that this movement is going to dramatically change, the only way that it's going to get traction and move in the direction that we all see it moving, is if we move past those things. Those closest to the problem are closest to the solution. I challenge you to implement that in your everyday life, in the work that you do when you're not in this room, because that is the only way that we're going to reach the goal of half by 2030. Thank you.
So what Khalil said is that we are in the most pressing civil rights era. And that's what we do in terms of undoing mass incarceration. What we do in terms of undoing mass incarceration. I'm going to bring up a leader who she makes no bones about it. Her style is ferocious when standing up for gender and equity, race and class issues. She is the Oprah Winfrey of this work. She is. I want to bring up, I know that her leadership touched our president, Glenn Martin, because when I trained, he referenced her. He quoted her. He talked to the women in our cohort about what she taught him. Vivian Nixon is the board chair for Just Leadership USA and the executive director of College and Community Fellowship. Please come on up, please.
Hello, hello, hello. Hello. I was here earlier today. I'm so sorry I had to leave, but I had to leave because I have decided to go back to graduate school. And I had to write a paper, and it was due by 5 p.m. So I'm enjoying living that life again. I really am. I actually just wrote an article about how reinvigorated I feel, because after years of being in this movement, doing this work on behalf of other people who want to get an education, I was feeling like, you know, I was just doing all this work to provide opportunities for everyone else, but I had not fulfilled all of my dreams yet. So I decided to set an example for myself and go back to school. I am so happy to be here with all of you, those of you who are past Leading with Conviction graduates and currently are alum, and those of you who graduated today, 36 of you. Is there 36?
Yes.
Congratulations. You have achieved today something that is going to impact the rest of your life, and that is not an exaggeration. When you get to a specific point in your leadership development, you'll start looking back, and you'll start asking yourself, what is it that allowed me to get to that place? What is it that allowed me to overcome this obstacle, that obstacle? What is it that makes me fearless in the face of obstacles that are to come? And one of the things you will list will be this training with Just Leadership USA.
That's right.
I can guarantee you that.
Yep.
I am so grateful to be part of this organization as board chair. But I consider that, while it's a great honor, I consider that title to be shared with so many other people. How many other board members are in the room tonight? I see Jackie. Anybody else? Tom is here. Tom is going to be a board member for about one more day because he's coming to work for Just Leadership. But I share this work on the side of governance with a group of highly dedicated, well-connected, and committed people who are going to make sure that this organization continues to move forward. Also, the JLUSA staff. Any staff? Of course there's staff here. I know Valerie's here because Valerie's everywhere. All of you guys, past and present and future, who work for the organization, keep it running, keep it looking sleek. When I think of Just Leadership, I think sleek.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
Not slick. Sleek.
Yes.
When you're on one side of the tracks, it's slick.
Right.
But once you move to the other side of the tracks, it's sleek.
Yeah.
So it means that you're polished, right? That you're highly professional.
Yeah.
That your presence is desired in every room. That everybody wants to be like you, right? Means that you have your stuff together.
Mm-hmm.
JLUSA has its stuff together.
Yes. Yeah. Right.
That is in no small part due to all of you who participate in the program, in no small part due to funders, donors, and board members, but it is in the biggest part due to someone who had a dream and who left a very lucrative position where he could have stayed for the rest of his life, where he could have ultimately been in complete leadership there, because nobody lives forever. Side joke. But decided to walk away from all of that. And for the first year after he walked away, literally didn't have a job. And I'm one of those friends who was saying to him periodically, like, are you sure you want to do this? Like, you don't have a job. But the more I talked to him, the more he convinced me that this was not just a decision he made because of a problem he wanted to fix. This was a calling he had.
That's right.
Does anybody know the difference between a job and a calling?
Yeah. Yeah.
Some of y'all go to church. Okay. So a job is what you get that helps you to sustain yourself, sustain your family. You go there every day and you do it because you have to. Now, some people are lucky enough to get a job that they like, but then there are others that the hand of destiny,
Yes.
a higher power, whatever you choose to call that higher power, reaches down
That's
from
right.
wherever
That's
and
right.
plucks you up
Yep.
and says, I got something for you to do.
Yep.
And
That's
you can
right.
decide to answer that call, or you can decide not to answer it.
Yeah.
Let's give a hand to my friend Glenn E. Martin, because he answered the call.
that call. Answering that call. Like Jonas in the belly of the whale.
Yeah.
You gotta do what you're created to do. We're gonna bring up a sister who has traveled from a far distance to be part of this 2017 cohort. You all might be the most beautiful cohort, you know that? And the reason I know that is because she's connected to my beautiful friend, who also is from that region of the United States of America. This sister, Venus Woods, is a certified chemical dependency counselor for the state of Alaska.
Woo!
And a certified facilitator of moral recognition therapy. But what I really want to say is congratulations, Venus Wood, for being a 2017 Just Leadership Fellow. Come on,
Yeah.
guys.
Thank you. Yeah.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
How's it going? So, for those of you that know me, you know that I am working on my public speaking. So I get very nervous, so just bear with me. I'm going to talk a little bit about myself, what brought me to Just Leadership, and why that's important. So, I grew up in Anchorage, Alaska. I'm a lifelong Alaskan, proud to be. And I come from a family where drug abuse and incarceration has really used to define us, really. My parents were both incarcerated. In fact, I was first exposed to the criminal justice system when I was a little girl, because I would go and visit my father, who was in federal prison, and also my mother that was in prison as well. So I grew up in and out of foster homes because of my parents' choices, and had babies young, 18, and I was a mom and trying to figure it all out. And you know, you can kind of guess the rest of the story. I had my own experience with the criminal justice system, and I was one of those people, I didn't get it the first time, the second time, the third time. You know, for a lot of us, it takes hitting our bottom, which my bottom was going to prison, losing my children, and the whole thing. So something happened, something shifted in me when I was in prison. And I decided that I not only was never gonna go back to prison, was never gonna use drugs again, but I didn't want my children to be in this family where it was almost guaranteed that you were gonna go to prison. And that's what kind of sparked my interest in this work. So I got out of jail in 2009 and immediately got involved in a reentry program where we worked with individuals getting out of prison. I graduated the program, became a mentor, became employed there, ended up being a program manager for them, and really just wanted to change the way things were done, you know. Fast forward, I heard about Just Leadership through my best friend, Kara Nelson. She's also from Alaska. She's a 2016 alumni from Just Leadership. And, you know, she said, you should apply. Now, we're totally different. Kara's probably waited till like 2 minutes before it was the deadline to, you know, put in her application, where me, of course, I worried about the application and what I was gonna say. And it was a big, just the application part was a big thing for me, just filling it out and hitting that send button. And then the phone call with David, you know, I'm on Alaska time, so I think it was like 6 a.m. when we talked. And the first cohort, when I got here, you know, I have a lot of qualities, but education is where I'm lacking. So when I walked into the first in-person training, and I had already Googled everybody that was in my cohort. I Googled everything I could about Glenn Martin and David, and so I'm one of those kind of, you know, nerds that like to be prepared. So all the amazing people in the 2017 cohort, it just blew my mind. I was probably one of 2 that didn't have an education. And you know, the first training, it was emotional. We were sharing our stories. I feel like in this year, though, I have grown so much.
Yeah. Yes.
Because of Just Leadership, I received like one of a lifetime promotion at work, with a huge pay raise that I never dreamed possible. I got appointed to the Alaska Advisory Committee for the U.S. Civil Rights. I've done a lot in the past year because of Just Leadership. Just Leadership, you know, before I came here, you know, I've been doing this work for a while, and I know Alaska, like other states, you know, a lot of these community programs, reentry programs, criminal justice programs, direct service programs, you know, they're all fighting over funding. And one of the things that stuck out to me about Just Leadership is how they invest in each other. Like Khalil works for another agency, but he's still here. You know, that's what we have to do as a Just Leadership community. Just continue investing in others around us, because we're all trying to get to the same goal.
Yes.
We all want to end mass incarceration. So I just want to say thank you to Just Leadership. I want to say that, you know, even though this is a goodbye, that I hope that everybody will stay connected, and God bless you guys.
Woo!
Thank you, Venus. And I want to bring up Venus's counterpart and friend, who also is a Just Leadership USA 2017 fellow, doctoral candidate in international business. She's the systems manager for the National Council for Incarceration and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls, and the executive director of Free Hearts, and today joins us as a leader and a fellow. Please come up, Don. Thank you.
Oh my God.
Thank you.
Woo!
Good evening, everyone. How y'all doing today?
Good evening. Hi, Dawn.
Greetings from the great state of Tennessee. First of all, I want to thank you, Glenn, for investing in our leadership. This has been truly a transformational experience. I want to thank all the staff, Ronald, Valerie, David, and everybody that came together to make this so amazing for us. I want to talk about why JLUSA matters. It matters for so many reasons. We're taught how to own our stories and to take the power out of our stories. We're taught to lean into conflict, to take responsibility. But most of all, it matters because of all of us. Because of everybody. I look at everything as a math problem. That people joke on me, so I'm always like, okay, 1 + 1 + 1 + 1, and it all comes together, and it equals half by 2030.
That's right.
And that's why JLUSA matters. So indulge me. I would like to. Glenn looked at me like, what are you about to do? I would like to invite you to close your eyes if you feel comfortable. Take a deep breath in and exhale. Inhale and exhale. Okay, I just want you to imagine yourself in a white room. And I think the idea came from, we've been here 9 months. And a nurse comes up to you and hands you a beautiful baby. It may be your child, maybe it's your grandchild, or maybe you don't know the child. But just look at the baby. Look at his cute little hands and his cute little feet. And he opens his eyes. Because of all of us, that little baby doesn't have to go through what we went through. Because of all of us, that baby doesn't have a prison bunk waiting on them because their third grade reading scores are lower than the norm. Because of us, that little baby doesn't have to spend time in seg and a box and a cage. Because of us, that little baby doesn't have to be ripped away from its family. Because of us, that little baby is going to grow up and is not going to have to worry about being discriminated against to get a house or to get a job or to get life insurance. Because of us, that little baby doesn't have to go from the cradle to prison pipeline, the school to prison pipeline, the foster care to prison pipeline. Because of us, that baby has a real opportunity and chance and possibility in this world. So I challenge you, take the mission of Half by 2030 and write it on the tablet of your hearts. Hold yourself accountable, because it's not about us. We can't change what we went through, but we can change for everybody else that's coming behind us, and that is our responsibility.
Yes.
So I'm going to close with a quote by Steve Jobs. Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify them, or vilify them. But the only thing you can't do is ignore them.
That's right.
Because they change things.
That's right. Get it, girl.
They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius.
That's right.
Because the ones who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
Yes. Yes.
I miss Obama. Her husband's all right too. I have to ask you to stand, please. Please stand. I need you to not just put your hands together right now, but I need you to put your hearts together. And I need you to please give a warm round of applause and welcome to our founder, President Glenn Martin. Please stand.
Good evening. I hate podiums. So I didn't write a speech because I wanted to just go with the moment. So thank you to the funders. I know there's some in the room. Thank you so much particularly the folks that came in early on and invested in the vision before you could rub your hand across it and realize what it would turn into. Thank you to our board members, our board of directors. Thank you to our board of advisors. Thank you to Sheldon for being such a great MC. You know, we produce magic around here, and yesterday somebody said to me, "Did you get John Legend for our graduation?" I was like, I got somebody better than John Legend. I got Khalil Cumberbatch. Where is he? There he is. I want to thank a few other people. I want to thank the team at Just Leadership USA. Just put your hand up, folks. They do the work, I get the credit. I love them. There's 23 of us now. It's gonna be 50 of us by the middle of next year.
Crazy.
That makes me think back to where this all started. Are there volunteers in the room, first of all? Nothing at Just Leadership USA happens without volunteers. Nothing, thank you to the volunteers. Are there Closed Rikers members in the room? Are there Closed Rikers members? There you go. Are there Just Leadership USA members in the room? Wow. So we could turn out an audience like this on Sunday at 6 o'clock. That says something about the institution. That says something about the fellows. That says something about the fact that we deliver on promises around here. When I left Just Leadership USA, Vivian, thank you for bringing me back to the days when I left Fortune Society to do this. Because a lot of people are like, why are you doing that? Like, that feels like a mistake to me. You're in an amazing position, an amazing role, and yet it was such a lonely place. Like, I went from being in Midtown Manhattan 13 years earlier, owing $100,000 in fines, fees, restitution, child support, to sitting as vice president of this institution where I had a tremendous amount of access to resources and to people and to power and to privilege. And I found myself in spaces where people like us really had the opportunity to have access. And when I was in those spaces and I participated, on the way out, people would say, wow, Glenn, your contribution was like amazing. And I'd be like, oh, that person went to Yale, that person went to Harvard, that person went to Columbia, that person went to NYU. They just pat me on the back, you know, that can't be true. But then you hear the same thing over and over again, and you're like, there's some truth to this. So what is it that I'm contributing to these conversations that seem so valuable to these people that I'm putting up on this pedestal? And I realized that my experiential knowledge, my ability to take ideas from people who are mostly well-intentioned and run it through the filter of, that shit ain't gonna work, was like really important to those conversations. And so I said to myself, well, if one person can have that kind of access and shift conversations towards more meaningful outcomes in a country where 100 million Americans have a criminal record on file, imagine if we could amplify that. Imagine if we could not just invest in leaders, because we don't build leaders at Just Leadership USA. We identify leaders and we invest in them. These folks walked through the door last year as leaders. We have this video even is outdated. We have 366 leaders in 29 states plus DC. So imagine if we could not just invest in these leaders, because Glenn didn't get up, you know, if you see a turtle on a pole, he didn't get there by himself. Someone got that turtle up there. I didn't get to the top of Fortune Society by myself. Someone helped put me there. Many people helped put me there. Some of the people in this room helped put me there. So what was the math between standing in Midtown, owing $100 grand and not knowing what to do next, and meeting with the President of the United States. There's something in between that distance.
Yep.
There's some investment made to create that. And that's what we set out to do. And we set out to do it in a way with a tremendous amount of humility. We assumed that while we had an idea of what worked for Glenn, particularly around leadership training, I asked David Mensa, David, put your hand up, please. So David trained me 8-9 years ago, and there was a component to his training that took my career from this to this, took my ability to engage with people, to recognize that leading just the people who like you is not enough, that you need to be able to lead everyone, and that is part of the distance to the finish line. And I said, David, over coffee with no money in my pocket, because I left Fortune with concept paper, no money. I act like I had money. I had enough money for the coffee, David. And I was like, David, like, let me tell you about this vision. And we talked about the vision. And I said, but I want you to give me the core of what you do, this breakthrough action leadership. And then from there, let's just like build around that. Let's build a whole new curriculum. And let's listen to people as we build it. And then when we build it, let's continue to listen to people. And let's make it a curriculum that evolves from day to day, from minute to minute, from week to week, from year to year. In the middle of the training, when you see David come over and he's whispering in my ear while I'm whispering in his, it's because we're pivoting all over the place based on what we're hearing. Because I wanted to build an institution that wasn't like some of the ones that I've seen where they've gotten so big and so formidable and they've been around so long that they have no natural predator and they have no need to evolve.
Right.
If I ever become that, tap me on the shoulder, please. Because that's not what we run here at Just Leadership USA. And so imagine if we invested in these leaders, because they bring all these gifts with them. But what if we brought them in closer proximity to power and privilege? What if I took my entire network and brought the network closer to these leaders, the way we're doing it this evening? And what if these leaders walked away not just with shared skills, shared community, shared vision, but access to the kind of resources and power and privilege that they need to move their vision forward? Hey, Emily, how you doing? I didn't know you were here. How are you? Talk about one of those funders that like, you have a vision, I see it, I want to support it. Thank you. I see the Sills Family Foundation here also. How are you? It's always hard to like start calling people out, because then when you don't get everyone, people are like, oh, you didn't even call me out. So I love you all. If there's another funder I didn't see, I love you. But imagine that. Imagine if suddenly Glenn Martin didn't have to keep telling this story of how people exceptionalize me. Imagine if when emails came across my inbox that's like, Glenn, we really need you to do this. I'm like, you know what? I'd be great for that, but I got somebody else that might be great for that too. Imagine if at the same time that we invest in leaders, we push the field to be more intellectually honest about what it takes to build movements. And that we'll never get to the finish line with just a series of moments. And that moments are great, but movements are so much more powerful. And movements match what the people who've been most oppressed by the system say they want. What they want for themselves and what they want for that baby. So as I look out on this audience today, and as I recognize that we've graduated the third cohort of Leading with Conviction folks, and that we're stepping into a year where we got 149 applications for next year, the most we've ever gotten. We're gonna bring in another 36. We're gonna do 6 emerging leaders trainings. We're gonna try something new and elongate the length of these emerging leaders trainings. We're going to take Just Leadership from running closed Rikers to also identifying 3 or 4 other municipalities where we can launch similar campaigns with our folks in the lead. We're going to learn some lessons. We're going to get it wrong every once in a while. We're going to change some policies. We're going to change some hearts. We're going to change some minds. So one last thing and then I'll stop. Is anybody after me or I'm it? Cool. Got to build your own organization just to be able to control the mic that way, huh? So here's the last thing I'll say. So if you haven't been in the leadership training, you're invited. The amazing thing about these these fellows is at the beginning, we often say to them, is it okay to have other people in the room? And every single time they've said to us, not only is it okay to have other people in the room, but I want to figure out how to network with those other people. I want to be able to walk away with new relationships. And so we invite people in the room. So you're invited. And if you think this is great, this is nothing compared to what happens in that room. And I can talk to you ad nauseum about what happens in our training. It is not going to do it justice. So I'm inviting anyone in this room who's never been in on a Leading with Conviction training to come in, sit around the outskirts of the room, you're invited, and soak in what's happening in that room. And here's why. Every single person I've ever invited walks away saying, wow, I knew it was something great, but I didn't know it was that. And number two, people are like, I want that for myself. So we run this extremely sophisticated, organized, thoughtful, well-supported training. The leaders come in and they work on themselves and they work on each other. They don't have to think about anything. We move things around them very deliberately. But there are these moments in the training that if you're paying attention, I don't care if you're in the training or not, you grow from it. And so I'm going to tell you how I grew during this cohort. And I shared it with the fellows earlier, but I'm going to share it with folks who weren't in that space earlier. So this is for particularly the folks who sort of know Glenn from the field for the last 12, 13, 14 years, but haven't really seen me with the fellows. Like I tend to give the fellows a piece of me that I don't give to the field. And I do it because my goal, I had a funder say to me once, like, where's Just Leadership going to be in 10 years? I was like, how about we get together and take a look at the website and figure that out? Because if I'm still sitting here in 10 years, something is wrong. And so as I sit in on these leadership trainings, I'm using it also as a moment to grow myself. And so these leaders teach me things that, people say, Glenn, are you trying to build other leaders like you? I'm like, then you just don't know our leaders, because our leaders have skills and gifts that I just don't have as a leader. It's great that I have enough leadership skills to build this thing and a network to build this thing, but our leaders bring gifts to the table that I strive for. And here's the big one. Our leaders make themselves vulnerable. Part of their growth is that they come into space and they make themselves vulnerable and they give us permission to challenge them. And they give us permission to challenge them in front of a room full of their peers in the cohort. And so at the end of every training, there's a thing called a fireside chat. And it's a chance for me to sit up front with David. And it's a chance for me to talk to the leaders. And if you've ever heard me talk in public, like now, I can do this in my sleep, right? I've done this over and over and over again. I can craft a talk where I essentially know what the audience is going to ask when I'm done, because I've done it so many times. And so I can easily sit in front of the fellows and just tell stories and avoid the tough stuff. And this year I was like, I'm not going to do that, because if they can practice that skill of being vulnerable, then I want to be a stronger leader myself, and I want to be vulnerable for them. And I don't want to speak for the fellows, but what it did, I believe, was to help them not just look at me and say, oh yeah, but that's Glenn. Because that's why I got into this, to move away from that very same messaging. And I found that I was showing up that way for previous cohorts. Like, yeah, of course, that's amazing, but that's Glenn. And I needed people to see me as that guy who was standing in Midtown, just out of prison, 6 years, $100,000 in fines, fees, restitution, child support, not knowing where I was going to work next, having someone try to murder me in front of my mother's house by pulling out a shotgun and pulling the trigger and having the gun not go off. Because that gets lost when people see this now. And I thought that that would be such a detriment to our fellows to walk away from this leadership training and to further exceptionalize me and have that get in the way of them further investing in themselves and seeing that at some point in my journey, I was them.
That's good.
So I want to thank you guys. I want to thank you publicly, because I'm coming out of this year as a stronger leader myself and someone who's going to continue to work on myself. And when I built this institution, I could never have imagined what it would grow into. The people that would come through the door, but most importantly at this moment, what it would do for me as a human being and as a leader. So that's where I want to end. I want to end on thank you all. Half by 2030.
Please feel free to have more hors d'oeuvres, mingle, talk to one another. Thank you. Thank you very much.